Well, thank you, Melina, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be invited to speak to this forum, and may I, Andrew, Melina and others, congratulate you on bringing this together. I have a long history of speaking to forums within the cooperative movement, mostly in the financial services sector, credit unions, building societies, friendly societies and so forth, stretching back over more years than I think I care to remember at this juncture. But one of the things that I'd always been struck by was the difference across the various parts of the cooperative movement. You all had a similar story to tell, but it presented itself in different forms. And I think that unity is going to serve you well, so congratulations. And the opportunity now to speak to you about very important matters for our country is also a pleasure, so thank you for having me. I understand that you heard from my professional colleague Saul last night about the economic backdrop. I'll have a little bit to say about that as well, so maybe a little bit of overlap. But then again, I'm sure you'll appreciate that there are three types of economists, those who can count and those who can't. I'm obviously in the latter of those. So you'll have heard a lot of quantitative stuff from Saul, all of which will be very accurate, and I'll probably try to give you the story behind it. The reason for that is that our country, as you know, is travelling through some interesting economic times. And I want to just unpack that a little bit for you because it provides you with the backdrop for the commercial decisions that you need to make and for the commercial opportunities which you face as organisations. We can face these challenges and opportunities in a positive mood or in a defeatist mood, to quote our new Prime Minister. You know where he's coming from, and you can see the impact that that has had on the national mood. Same problems, they haven't gone away. Same challenges, they haven't gone away. Same opportunities, they haven't gone away. But if you change your attitude to how you approach those things, Vice-Chancellor, then you will completely change your capacity to deal with this. And it's not somebody else's problem. No, it's our problem, right? And there's no need to be defeatist about it because we can make this work. We need to be pragmatic. We need to see what solutions there are possible. If one doesn't work, we try another one. And we keep working with them until we get this to happen. Do we have policy options? Plenty. Are there things we can do? Absolutely. We just have to gather a common sense of what our purpose is, what the outcome is, and we tack and change direction and alter the rigging as necessary to achieve the outcome. That's the sort of message that will appeal to business people like you. Our new Prime Minister is a businessman in the final analysis, a very successful one. And that pragmatism, that sheer focus on outcomes, that determination to get results is something that I think we can all see resonates with a lot of Australians. Certainly resonates with me. And if we can approach these issues in that spirit, we've got a wonderful future ahead. But that isn't to deny that we don't face some problems. I understand Saul talked to you about China in great detail, then let me just show you one chart. The Chinese economy is slowing. It is soon to become the world's largest economy, so naturally it's going to slow in its growth. Our economy is uniquely exposed to the Chinese economy for reasons you would understand well. At least during its growth phase, rapid growth phase or industrialisation phase, we've supplied them with resources and they've supplied us with manufactured goods. And those two things together have driven up Australia's terms of trade. You can see in this chart, if you look at the green line, what happened to Australia's terms of trade over the period of the rapid industrialisation in China. Our terms of trade, the ratio of export prices to import prices. So as the Chinese economy rapidly industrialised, it drove up the prices of basic commodities. That's what we export. Turned those commodities into manufactured goods, drove down the prices of manufactured goods. That's what we import. So we copped this in both directions. Export prices going up, import prices going down. So that ratio marked there in green, as you can see, just took off like a rocket. Now that's intimately linked to Australia's living standards in much the same way as it would be for you. If your wage or salary were to rise unaccountably, you're not having to do any more work, just goes up, and the cost, the price of the things that you buy with your income goes down. So obvious what the implication would be for your living standards if that were to happen. Nationally, that's what happened to us. My colleague Chris Richardson describes it, we just had a national pay rise. We didn't have to work any harder, but up went our wages, and into the bargain, the things that we like to spend money on got cheaper. Well, that very quickly, as you can see with the blue line, set in train a mining investment boom. And a mining investment boom of truly historic proportions. Frankly, you could take that chart right back, covering the gold rushes in this great state of Victoria, the gold rushes in Western Australia, the Poseidon mining boom, you pick it, and you would not get a chart that would outstrip that one. This was an enormous mining investment boom. Now you see how those two lines, one follows the other one? They are the first two phases of a commodity price boom. First go the commodity prices, driven up in this case, as we know, by the rapid industrialization of China, which was on a scale and at a pace unprecedented in world economic history. That's why it's driven things so rapidly. That's peaked and now turned. Following in its train comes the investment boom. Obviously, resources prices go up, then the producers of resources start digging them up and pumping them out. That has also turned, as you can see. And by looking closely at the chart, you can see more or less where we are. If you focus there on where the line is drawn for the forecast, the broken parts of the line chart there represent forecasts as opposed to the actual data, then you can see that we're still travelling through this. We're living through the reversal of the phase that took us up. So we had this massive pay rise. The prices of what we consume went down. And then we got the equivalent of a letter from the bank which told us that they put the money in the wrong account. And they were going to take it all back out again. Oh, and by the way, then comes another letter which says, oh, and the prices that you've been paying for all these goods and services, sorry, that was a mistake. Right? We're now putting all those prices back up again. So we're experiencing the converse, the mirror image, the opposite of what went up, and it's driving us back down again. So inasmuch as your living standard would be severely affected if you took that wage cut, and into the bargain, the prices of the things that you buy, consume, have gone back up again. Well, I haven't got to explain to you what's going on. That's what's happening. Down, down, down we go into the abysmal sea. Well, we're about 2/3 of the way through the transition, to quote the Reserve Bank Governor. Now, he's encouraged enough at the last meeting to say, I'm leaving interest rates where they are for the time being. We're about 2/3 of the way through the transition, says Glenn and his colleagues on the board. And they're encouraged by how business investment is actually beginning to pick up the slack that mining investment has left off. And there are nice signs. Here in the state of Victoria, for example, you would think that given that we've basically lost the motor vehicle manufacturing industry, and other aspects of manufacturing in the state are doing it really tough, you would think that Victoria would be a state on its back, that unemployment would be well above the national average, that people would be leaving this state, not coming to this state. The opposite is true. Unemployment in Victoria is slightly below the national average. And our population growth is the fastest of any of the states. Hello? No? Yes, that's true. Why? Well, because, amongst other things, the Victorian economy is transforming itself in the light of these sorts of changes. Lots of things are happening. Business people like yourselves are getting off, pardon me, their backsides and responding to this. There are opportunities as well as challenges. Now, I don't mean for a second to diminish the travail of those who are still unemployed. And it looks like unemployment will stick around 6% for some time to come. But with a story like this, you could expect unemployment to be much, much higher than 6%. I'm not trying to make virtue of difficult circumstances, but I am saying that a lot is happening to respond to these circumstances. And it's keeping unemployment much lower than it could otherwise have been. Each time we've been through a transition like this, and this isn't the first, it's the biggest, but it's not the first, we've ended up with massive unemployment and a recession. Now, some of my colleagues, serious colleagues, think that we won't escape from this without a recession either. I don't share that view. In fact, Deloitte Access Economics doesn't share that view, but there are serious commentators who think that we won't escape without a recession. If we don't escape, it'll be because we've had a much more difficult time adjusting than I think at this stage we're likely to do. And if we don't escape, it'll be because we've not grasped the nettle of the policy opportunities that stand before us. And if I may say finally, if we don't escape, it'll be because we've taken on the mantle of defeatism. What difference can it make that we have a positive attitude? That we have a leader who is prepared to make pragmatic decisions and to lead us on? I don't need to answer that question for you. You're all leaders yourselves. You know what difference that can make. Same problems, same people, different attitude and outlook. Whew, the wind beneath your wings. Okay, so we're 2/3 of the way through this transition. Here's a rather more complex chart. Let me take you through it slowly. Firstly, look at the black line that runs across there. Those are our forecasts, Deloitte Access Economic Forecasts, for the growth of output, GP, as you can see there, for the next decade or so. Notice that that black line bounces along basically a little under 3%. See the OECD today in today's press forecasting the next 12 months growth at 2.6. We say that is likely to be the case for the next decade. Now, this economy has been used to growing at 3.25. If it now grows at roughly 2 3/4 rather than 3 1/4, and that looks like it's set, then we're looking down the barrel of an extended period of subpar growth. And that will keep unemployment at roughly 6% or so. No recession, not predicting that, but we are predicting sluggish growth, subpar growth. Now look at the composition of that growth. That's what the different colours in the bars show you. The ones to note are mostly the red. The red represented engineering construction. That's the equivalent in this chart of that enormous upswing in engineering investment in the blue line in this chart. So you can see very strong contribution to growth until quite recently when it stopped. And not just stopped, it went into reverse. How does that happen? Well, we're not doing enough engineering construction to actually compensate for the depreciation of the capital that's already there. And one doesn't expect that to change into the foreseeable future. So the engineering construction boom has finished, and its contribution to output growth is negative for the next little while. That's part of the downdraft that I've been talking about. Focus now on the yellow. The yellow represents exports. You can see that started 2012, and then you can see it extending out over the next 10 years at least. That's the third phase of the mining boom. First phase, terms of trade. Second, investment. Third, exports. So will the exports come? Sure they will. They are coming. And mining export growth will continue into the foreseeable future. But what it's not going to do is to replace mining investment as a form of driver of growth. It won't pick up that sharply. Into the bargain there, you can see the green, which represents consumption, and there's a bit of housing investment picking up in the light blue as well. But all of that adds up to growth which is sluggish by historical standards. Now here's the real rub. This chart is taken directly from the government's intergenerational report. And what it does, it takes decade by decade over the past and into the future, and it shows you, this time, the composition of income per head, as it turns out, growth in income per head. Now, normally, you reach back to your undergraduate economics, you'd remember that to talk about output and income as two sides of the same coin. That's not true, of course, when the price of output is changing. When the price of output is falling, then income departs from output. In other words, you can still be working as hard as you were, but if your wage is going down, then your income has fallen, even though your output essentially is constant. Output growth 2.6. How come we end up with numbers here that are a good deal less than 2.6 or 2.7? Because for the next decade, we'll be working off the gradual decline in the terms of trade. Look into the forecast or projection side of that chart over here to the right of the line, and you see there the rapid reduction from this period, 2000 to 2013, the last decade and a half, where we were experiencing growth in income per head north of 2%. In fact, at a level that we'd experienced even through the 90s, diving down into the current decade, into the projected decade, to a level of growth under 1% when you add up all the components. Why is that happening? What's doing that? Look at the grey bar. The grey component has simply gone in the other direction. A positive contribution on the way up, a negative contribution on the way down. Acting against the growth in productivity, which is the green bar, and in that instance a tiny impact coming along from labour force participation. So there in the grey bar you can see the work that the terms of trade reversal is doing to income per head. So we've got two things going against us. Firstly, output growth is sluggish. Secondly, the price of that output is falling. So income growth per capita is even lower than that on these forecasts, under 1% per annum. And well, surely that will change. Well, on these projections, again, these are government projections, you can see, sure, the terms of trade effect switches off. So there is no longer a grey bar, positive or negative, if you go out far enough. And what's left? What's left is productivity growth, the green bar. And we're predicting, or the Treasury is, on the basis of 40 years' experience, that productivity growth would give us growth in income per head of roughly 1.5%. You see from the chart that that is historically low. Now here's the problem. Australians aren't used to that. They are not used to having income growth substantially slower than output growth and substantially slower than it has been historically. And it will take time for people to adjust their consumption patterns to lower income patterns. Debt will go up until they realise that they're living beyond their means and retrenchment is required, pulling back. I don't want to do that. Why should we do that? Why should the next generation live less well than we lived? All of those things you hear people talk about. There's a real prospect of that happening. Well, are we strapped to this juggernaut? Someone's lit the fuse? Are we all doomed? Do something about the green bar. Can we do something about that? We've done it before. We've got form. Look back here, the 1990s. Look at that. If you took that productivity improvement there and replaced this or these two, ideally, with that, you can see you'd be back again above 2%, certainly after the terms of trade effect has worked its way through. That is why the government is talking about productivity growth. That is why there's a competition policy review. That is why there's talk about tax reform. That is why my colleagues and I at Deloitte have started talking about place. There are lots of things we can do to drive productivity growth. We know about this, and this isn't just some antsy theory. We have form, folks. We know what this looks like, and we know that it works. But it's not easy. Ask the taxi drivers. Ask the booksellers. Ask the pharmacists. I can't go into a pharmacy. I can't buy a book. I can't buy a second-hand car. I mean, life's really interesting. I got into a taxi about 3 weeks ago, and a guy said, "Are you Ian Harper?" And I said, "Yep," thinking, oh my goodness. And he said, "So am I," right? I wonder where we're related. Much more interesting trip to the airport than I was expecting, right? Sometimes you can be lucky. Yeah, it's tough, okay? Business arrangements have to change, but you can do something about it. Now, some of it's going to happen anyway. To be perfectly frank, if we sat on our squat and didn't move at all, digital disruption would do a fair amount of this work for us. Not all of it, but it would do a fair amount for us anyway. So, the taxi exercise, for example, how much of that is due to Harper? Well, frankly, that report hasn't been responded to yet. And I acknowledge my colleague Sue McCluskey. Where's Sue? There she is, my co-panellist. Sue and I and Peter and Michael are obviously very much hoping that the government will respond to our report and respond to it favourably, picking up many of the ideas we think are there. We'd be naive to think that they'll take the lot, and it's a matter for the government to decide what they're going to take. Our point really is that there's a whole lot of stuff that can be done. We are not victims here. We don't need to be defeatist about this. And this isn't embarking on some campaign that some academic has thought up. No. We've done this before. And it works. So we'll have peer-to-peer platforms. The blockchain technology, for those of you in the financial services sector, and have a look at The Economist magazine a fortnight ago, that is genuinely new. Not just about Bitcoin, forget about that. Changing the way. Record-keeping, central banking, financial market, completely changing all of that. And for those of you not in the financial services business, there'll be aspects of that which will change life for you too. Genuinely new. Exciting. And peer-to-peer is the same. Competition policy, yes. We can reform all these laws, planning and zoning laws, retail trading hours, even cost-reflective road pricing. That was a surprise for Sue and me. When I got on to talkback radio, they wanted to talk about pharmacies and supermarkets, retail trading hours, and that, road pricing. You aren't going to start charging us to use the roads. The roads belong to the people. The government's paid for the roads. When I explained to them that this was the only piece of infrastructure left where the government essentially pays for it out of the tax base and gives it away, I said to one in Sydney, how would things work if the government paid for all the electricity out of the tax system, out of their revenue, and just gave electricity away to people? What do you suppose would happen? Well, the person said, well, I mean, people would just use it like it was sort of running water, right? It would be hopelessly inefficient. Queues, blackouts. I said, that's right. I said, now you just translate that to the road system here in Sydney, right? Queues, blackouts, congestion. Same thing, because the government pays for it all and just gives it away. Change that arrangement. The technology is there. Not talking about raising revenue on balance. Change the way the asset is priced, like electricity, like water. Roads are next, in fact, they're the last. It gave rise to a much more interested and informed conversation on talkback radio than I had expected. Right? Because people get that connection. They understand that if it's just given away, right, then it gets abused. That's what happens with the roads. Well, what's the opportunity for mutuals, for you good folk? The biggest area for the Competition Policy Review, and I'm delighted that the new Treasurer and by implication the Prime Minister as well have gotten this message. It's not about Section 46, even though we think Section 46 needs to be changed. That is not the big game. This is the big game. Taking human services, health, education and welfare, and driving competition into that. What am I talking about? Private schools and private hospitals, already got them? No. Yes, we've got private schools and private hospitals. No, God bless them. I'm talking about the public sector. Right? And what does competition look like in the public sector, may I ask? Contestability, choice, flexibility, innovation, driving the public provision of these services, using mechanisms that the private sector understands well and that people understand well. Give me a picture, I'll give you a picture. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, where individual Australians with a disability, for the very first time, can exercise choices that you and I would take for granted. One guy said to me, you know, mate, he says, there's nothing wrong with Meals on Wheels. I've had Meals on Wheels delivered to me nearly all of my life. He said, but with this new system, for the first time, I can order a beer and pizza if I feel like it. Right? And you just think, oh, mate. And that's a person with a disability. Something simple that you and I would regard as trivial. For that man, not only was it just an improvement in his capacity to choose, it was about his dignity and his ability to live a life that he valued. Well, is that a message that I need to preach to the mutuals? Nope. You get that. Right? So this is a whole field where mutuals, cooperatives, I'm not saying the not-for-profits can't do a job too. I mean, one of the great examples we have in this country is, Ramsay, not just a for-profit organisation, a multinational for-profit shareholder limited company, runs one of the largest quaternary public hospitals in Western Australia. The Western Australians, I think it's great. The Treasurer of Western Australia says, you can't believe this, mate. They meet all of the quality criteria that I impose. And in some areas, they are 40% cheaper than the public system. Bring it on, says the Treasurer of Western Australia, the same people who regulate the growth of potatoes, I might add. Right? And who haven't deregulated their electricity system. One person over there on a talkback radio said to me, stop, what do you mean choice of electricity distributor? Right? And yet they get at the hospitals, you see. You try and tell here in my great state of Victoria, try and tell the people that we're going to let Ramsay run the Alfred Hospital and see what happens to you. Try and get them to give up their choice of electricity distributor and see what happens to you. Try and impose Queensland and South Australian retail trading hours on them and see what happens to you. You see, different parts of the country are used to different things, and we think it's quite natural. So you don't have to take some academic's word for this. Go and ask a fellow Australian what life is like when retail trading hours are deregulated. Do all the small businesses die? Outside the major supermarkets, is there not 2 bakeries, a fish shop, a fruit shop? Is that not the case? So deregulating these things, will this destroy retail pharmacy? People used to say that about bakeries and fish shops and fruit shops. We've been there, we've done that, we know it doesn't happen. You don't need to take my word for it. And I said these things in Queensland, and the next day the Courier Mail said, Professor Harper painted Queensland as a backward state. I rest my case. And I can say that because I'm a Queenslander. I dearly love them. My relatives are still up there. Some have crept down south. So all of this area, right? You've got an advantage. People don't think about mutuals in the same vein as privatisation. I've tried to make it absolutely clear I'm not talking about privatisation. I'm talking about choice and flexibility. I'm talking about those experiences which that man had with a disability being extended to all Australians in health, education, social services. Think about what that means. I'm not going to stand here and unpack all the detail. I don't know what the detail looks like. I'm saying here is the principle. I'm saying to people like you, go and invent. Try something new. Right? We've given you the direction here. We've given the government direction. It is my fervent prayer that under the new administration, our new Prime Minister and Treasurer will take this, shake out the bits that they think they can really work with, and the Treasurer is very keen on this one. And let's get on with the job of making this work. Finally, there's a scope here to combine new business models. I gave a conversation, a talk about this recently, and a couple of young women come up to me and said, we are actually building the Uber for the world of choice in the NDIS. Another chap, perhaps you know, runs an outfit called Better Choice, which is a more sort of complete version of what these two young women were saying they were going to get up, and they've started building. There's a generational change here too. Don't underestimate that, which is another reason why it's terrific that you've changed your name and you've come together. The next generation needs to understand what this principle of mutuality, they need to understand that. It's not that they don't get it. In fact, they get this idea, perhaps more so than my generation, but they don't recognise it. So I had two totally different conversations, just to pick Uber as one example. I couldn't get anybody over the age of 40 interested in the Uber. I couldn't get anybody under the age of about 35 interested in taxi regulation. Right? Don't get it. What are you talking about? One guy said to me, he said, mate, I said, I'm an investment banker, 30 years old. He said, I go to New York City every 6 weeks. He said, I get out at Newark, I get Uber to take me into Manhattan. He said, the last time, the guy took me the long way. I got out of the taxi, got my phone, I gave him 1 star. And then I wrote, took me the long way. He said, within an hour, I had an email from Uber in Germany. Dear Mr. So-and-so, we have tracked your journey. You are correct. You were taken 7.5 kilometres out of your way. The driver has been sanctioned and your account has been fully credited with the fare. Have a nice day, Uber. And the guy said to me, mate, he says, it's got nothing to do with regulation. He said, it's about customer service, right? And this kid was 30 years old, right? They get it. They're ready for this, but they need a new language. They trust platforms and systems. They trust each other. They trust networks and information much more than you do. They do not trust institutions. So when you say, here are the mutuals and co-ops coming to help you, you need to explain to them that you aren't yet another institution to tell them how to run their lives. That's the message for my generation, not for their generation. Now, how that translates, you need to solve. But I'm just telling you, that was my experience. They're interested, obviously, in trust and good service, just like anybody else is. But they don't think institutions can do it. And given the awful things that have been dredged up in recent royal commissions about how institutions have behaved over the years, can you blame them? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Harper. Thank you so much for that rousing call to action. Certainly from my perspective, I think you're saying to us, what are we going to do? What are we going to do on the chart around the productivity bar? And what are we going to do as consumer champions? And this great opportunity that we have to mix commercial efficiency with consumer-directed services and focus. So thank you. Can I ask you again to join me in thanking Professor Harper?